let's go ahead and learn how to build a parser file. Excuse me. All right. So in this example today, I'm going to be making 3 different parser files, and I'm actually going to be using these parser files when we do NetBrain 202 next week. So +, new parser, although actually, let me, before we get into it, let me open up the parser library. This is where things unfortunately get a little bit complicated, so please just bear with me, okay, guys? All right, as we see, there's over 2,300, almost 2,400 built-in parser files for all different stuff. And if we look, we see for the individual parsers, most of them have this pink or red icon. Whereas if we look in, depending on other stuff, there's others that might have this blue icon. So what's the difference? If we right-click on a folder to create new stuff, there's new parser or new advanced parser. So read this as new visual parser versus new advanced parser. So let me tell you a story. At one point, when we were expanding NetBrain out from just a mapping and documentation tool into a full automation platform, initially we came up with the idea of these parser files. We built the parser file format and everything was good. This original parser file format is today known as an advanced parser because it was a little more complicated to use in certain respects than what we're going to be using today. Nothing crazy. But it supported being able to parse from CLI show commands, config files, SNMP gets, walks, and tables, or RESTful API pulls. Now and everything was good. Now fast forward to when I believe NetBrain version 10 came out, but regardless, when network intents dropped. And when they went to build network intents, I don't know the details, don't ask, because I really don't know. But something about the what's now the advanced parser format didn't quite work for building network intents. So they took the opportunity to not only define a new format, but to make it simpler to use for us. And this is what's now called a visual parser. So for most purposes, a visual parser is to be preferred. The only thing is a visual parser cannot support RESTful API retrievals. So we have this huge library, this huge log of parser files, but they're almost all in advanced parser format. So what we're going to be wanting to do as an organization is, as we adopt NetBrain, we're going to want to build our own library of parser files, and we're going to want to build it as visual parsers. And we'll want to organize it and store it in the shared parsers within the tenant. Now, how you choose to organize this is up to you. There's different ways to do it. But the important thing is that everybody is pulling on the same oar. We should not be duplicating each other's efforts. We should all be working off the same collected library of parser files. Okay? And there's 2 reasons for this. One is simply avoiding wasting time and effort. That's important. But, excuse me, the real reason is, how do I put this? Okay, when we use these parser files, NetBrain is going to save the values that we pull as historical data related to the specific variables on the specific devices and interfaces. So as you recall from NetBrain 101, when we use a data view template, we can then click values in the resulting data view and see their history. That's the most prominent place that this comes up. So that history is linked to the parser file and to the individual variables in the parser file. So we don't want this history that's being gathered to be split. Let's say the history for show int values on all different devices. We don't want that to be split among a whole bunch of different overlapping parsers. We want that all to be consolidated into a single show int parser for the given operating system. So that's the principle at play here. Hopefully that makes sense. So, yeah, any questions about any of that before we get into it?
No, I think we're good.
All right. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to build parser files. So +, new parser. So this is going to automatically open a visual parser. If you want an advanced parser, you have to go into the start menu, parser library, right click on a folder, new advanced parser, but that is still absolutely supported. So there's different places to build parsers as it comes up. It'll often come up as a pop-up in different things, but I like this method through the + menu because it gives us the entire browser tab to work with. So we just have more real estate. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select the type of data source. So in this case, we're doing 3 CLI show commands. And then we indicate the syntax of the show command, or for SNMP, the syntax of the get, the walk, or the table. So for this first one, for keyword parsing or just variable parsing, we're going to use show version. And in this case, I'm parsing on Cisco iOS. Now, I'm not a Cisco fanboy particularly. I've got nothing against them, but the reason you may notice we use iOS a lot in these examples is simply that's what we've got in the test environment for the most part, so don't read into it. And then we want to choose a sample device. Now, this is where our sample output is going to come from, and we need some sample output to make sure that the statements we define actually work. So in this case, I'm going to query one of the devices in branch site 2. There we go. And here's my show ver output. Now, why did I put show version instead of show ver? Why didn't I say show ver? And the answer is that we really want to use the full syntax as a best practice. And the reason for that is, remember the parser discovery? When people are string searching, we're often going to string search for an abbreviation, and that's fine. So an abbreviation will typically match the full syntax. But if I define this with an abbreviation, everyone's going to have to guess, okay, exactly what abbreviation for show version did the author of the parser file prefer? Because we all have our own little ways of abbreviating stuff. So it's best to use the full syntax. And yes, of course, you can use arguments and whatever else. Anything that's valid at privileged exec mode or equivalent is valid here, broadly speaking.
Matthew, quick question. The data source types you've got CLI configuration. I'm assuming is that a saved configuration on NetBrain?
Yes. So NetBrain, as part of the basic driver support for a device, knows how to pull the config file. So for the sample, do we want to pull it from the baseline, or do we want to retrieve it live from the specified device? But NetBrain knows how to pull the config.
If you wanted to pass output from an API, would that be an advanced parser?
Correct. So here, let me actually show you real quick. Yeah, I didn't make that clear enough earlier. Sorry. So what we would do is we would right-click, new advanced parser. And then you see it's a similar output, a similar user interface, but slightly different. And here we have the option of API. Now, one thing to note is, so this is where we put the RESTful API function to retrieve from the third-party system. Now, you are also going to have to tell NetBrain how to find the specific server for the third-party system. They're also going to have plugins on their two respective systems, so basic integration is going to have to be present, and I can go through what that involves after class if anyone's curious. There's also a video in the deep dive. So this is depending on all of that. So what's the function to issue to the device? Here's our results. Now, when they built this for API specifically, I think they assumed that if you can define a retrieval function, you'll be able to define parsing